So, speaking of new life and mothers, this picture here is the picture of my mother who died today a year ago.
Can you pass it around?
Yeah. And when we made this date a long time ago, I didn't realize that this day would be a day when I wasn't at home with my sister or sisters, but here with you. And so I wondered if you all felt okay if I just took a little bit of time and read someone else's bio of her, just so that you got a bit of a taste of my mother. And also then I want to put it in context. I went to a Howard Zinn book fair, which a lot of different activist groups went to, and there was a series of workshops by the Institute for Political Economy, which is really totally amazing. And a couple of presenters talked about their work, their activism, and I was especially moved by one of them and went up to her and said, "So what supports you in maintaining your resilience?" And she said, "Staying connected to my lineage and my ancestors, and the practice of joy," which we in the Sangha have talked about the practice of joy a lot. That touched me. And so some of what I want to talk about are the ways some stories and people have contributed to my own lineage of resilience, and especially around love and generosity. And something Dzogchen teacher said, John Makarensky, who is also a professor of religion at Boston University, mentioned in a book he wrote about loving kindness. And in that practice of loving kindness, the invitation is to call in all your ancestors, your teachers, your lineage holders, and to invite them into a circle around you. So we pick, I think I might even have guided you in some of this. So we pick a spot that feels sacred in our mind that we've been to, some place in nature or somewhere, and then we call in these beings. And he said something that really struck me. He said, call in the people who love you, and it doesn't have to be that love is unconditional love the whole time. It could just be a moment where you have felt their love as unconditional. And that really was such a reframe for me around how we can take joy and grow resilience as a practice in these difficult and challenging times, right? Because in my perfectionism early days, I would insist that somehow if I was going to take someone as an ancestor or bring them into my circle of people who were going to send me loving kindness, right, in that sacred space, that their love had to be unconditional and long-lasting and perfect through time, which excluded a lot of people. Including my mother. And so when he said that, it was such a reframe, and it fell into place in such a beautiful way for me that it is just each moment. It is just a moment of love that can become a refuge. And so I've heard Isabel Allende speak a lot, and she's a novelist, and she lost her daughter. Her daughter died, and she said that she went into a lifeless desert for a while, for years. And then after coming out of this wilderness, she said it felt like a wilderness. She says, I don't cling to anything anymore but love. And that, I know that we have moments of that, right? We have moments when something happens and the teaching or love comes through in an unmediated way, where there is absolutely no doubt that love is the path. And that in a wilderness of ignorance, which we find ourselves mediating in this world, and in our own ignorance, in our inner world of ignorance that Linda spoke so beautifully about, that irritation and reactivity that's there some of the time, that there are just moments where there's that touching and that dropping into this understanding of the power of the path of love, and that it just needs to be a moment. So I thought of the story again of a teacher in a school who gave his class the exercise of writing a note to each other class member of what they appreciated about that person in the class. And I actually did this when I was in the anti-racist training with Visions, which is a multicultural training organization in Boston. And at the end of the training, it was a 5-day or 6-day training. That was the exercise where we were to go around and write what particular energy or quality we felt deeply appreciative of with each person. And then we would hand each person a note. So we all ended up with 20 notes of appreciations. And it was really a beautiful exercise. So this teacher did the same thing in his class. And one of the members of the class, a young man, died as a veteran in Iraq. And his body was brought back to the United States. And in the shirt, in the pocket of the shirt that he was wearing, his parents discovered, which they shared at his memorial, were some of the notes of his classmates. Oh, that's upstairs.
Yes, there is a meeting.
Oh, right. I'm like, earthquake? What? Just the power of that moment of writing something beautiful on a note, and how it carried through years and through a war, and how touched his parents were. And so they went to find the teacher and invited him to the memorial to give him thanks. And so that lineage of gratitude and love has just carried on. And the power of just that simplicity of it. And there was one other story that I wanted to share. This is the other story I wanted to share. This is a story about Gunther Remick, who created a massive art installation, and he names it as an offering of grace. Beginning in Cologne, his art installation has spread to 18 different countries, and he has placed more than 50,000 small monuments in memory of those who were deported or removed by the Nazis. It's a small bronze plaque wherever that person last lived. And the information he gathered by interviewing neighbors and friends and even government, people in government. And on the plaque that he created was just the name of the person, their date of birth, their arrest, and the place where they died. Each plaque begins with "Here lived," and it's very simple. And the project began when Gunther met a friend in a neighborhood where he mentioned that he used to live and where it was full of Romanians, also called gypsies in Europe. And she didn't believe him. She said, turning around and looking at the area and in the cafe where it was all Europeans, she said, there are no gypsies here. And she had no idea of the history of how many gypsies had been interred in concentration camps or directly murdered. So he placed, 20 years ago, was the first plaque he placed in front of a Roma house where a family had lived and worked, where they'd had children and eaten with countless dinners and songs. And giving acknowledgement and respect to their disappearance. And he felt like he was offering this intimate gesture in opposition to the silence of their disappearance. The plaques are flush with the ground and they're called stumbling blocks. And they're set in such a way that they are in the way of apathy and denial and forgetfulness. They serve as obstacles to complacency. And it's not what is written on the stone, but the emptiness of the stone and where they sit in the midst of life. Just as we're going around walking and doing shopping, we found ourselves stumbling over these stones. Feel so moved by that gesture of doing that research to name and honor the lives of the disappeared. And then the ways that we too, in this community and in other ways that maybe each of you find yourself doing, work towards honoring what has been disappeared, whether it's that we're coming to an acknowledgement of disability and that disappeared acknowledgement and needed respect of honoring those with disability, or whether it's our work in cross-race communities and dialogues. or acknowledging what has been silenced or not lifted up, and doing the work, often very uncomfortable work to lift that up. So I was in a race dialogue on Saturday, and in these race dialogues, every 2 months, groups of us get together to explore racism and white privilege. And in this last race dialogue, there were a lot of new people, new white people. And actually, there were also quite a few new people of color in the dialogue. And there was a couple who had just come back to live in Berkeley and said, why do we have to go, why do we have to work so much on looking at our differences? Why can't we just be together and in unity? Why can't we just be like one whole community? And my heart just sunk. Because I was like, I've been in these dialogues for a long time. And I was like, oh my God, we're going back to square one. Of how the nature of privilege, whatever that privilege is to gloss over the inequity in the relationships and just jump to why can't we be one without doing the work that's necessary for us to be in communion and community, right? And I felt so just like irritated. And at the break, a lot of people left. That must have felt like me, like, okay, that's it, we're splitting the scene. Because sometimes the dialogues go really deep because we've been doing them a long time, And then I was like, no, you can't go, Arena. You get to sit and do the work, of that stumbling stone, of marking it and saying, no, I'm here, I want to. And not that it's great, and it's not that we aren't all stumbling in our own ways, but that commitment, really, those commitment to moments of love, they are our lineage. And it's through that remembering of what's come before us that gives us this resilience to go on. And and I think of some of the different words, so I wanted to share just some of the different words of people who have really who've really inspired me. And Sojourner Truth. Truth is powerful and it always prevails. I love that. Especially in this time with Trump, to have that deep faith, that place of no doubt that truth will prevail, that it prevails through time. I think that's so beautiful. And Helen Keller, who's also been one of my great inspirations. Faith is the strength by which a shattered world shall emerge into the light. And then she also said, so long as the memory of beloved friends live in my heart, I shall say that life is good. Isn't that beautiful?
Let's read that again.
Yeah. So long as the memory of beloved friends live in my heart, I shall say that life is good. So beautiful. And so then I also wanted to honor my mom. So it's just a page, if that's okay, because she's also been such inspiration to me, complex, challenging, and and inspiring. So I'm not going to do that. So my mom was one of the founders of what became ARM, or the African Resistance Movement, which was the first group to launch a sabotage movement in 1961 against the apartheid state. You get to see what kind of home I grew up in. A fiercely honest and independent thinker, talker, keen walker, her political activism began during her teenage years. As a first-year student at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg in the midst of World War II, she taught and eventually headed the Polly Street Adult Literacy Night School. And so that was, she started to drive. You probably know this already, but I'll say that in South Africa, the townships were totally separated from where white people lived. And it was actually illegal for Africans to live in places where white Europeans lived unless they were living as domestic servants. And so there were these separate communities called townships, and all the workers would either walk or come in by bus into the cities. It was very, I grew up with it. It was like watching these buses come in crowded with people every day into the town to do work. And so my mom wanted to teach, and there was the education system was minimal. She wanted to teach Black Africans to read and write. And so we would drive. I would be in the car with her sometimes. We would drive into the township so she could do it. There was never any white person going into the township, especially a white woman with a child. And there were no street lights. And I remember going with my mom. She would just do that drive. So that's what she headed. By far the youngest of 5 siblings, she learned early to fend for herself. At the age of 14, her parents left to manage a hotel in Durban, and she was given a small monthly allowance to pay for board and lodging and to keep herself at school in Johannesburg. So she went to stay with this family. I don't know if any of you have heard of Ruth Slover. She was an activist fighter. Joe Slover actually was part of the ANC government, and they were communists and activists. And Ruth was killed by a bomb set by the South African Secret Service in Mozambique. We were really close, our families. And so my mom went to live with Ruth's family when she was 14. And Ruth's mother was an activist and part of a left-wing book review club. And that's when my mom started to get educated in just in different philosophies, and particularly in Marxism. So I'm not going to read all this stuff then, except to say that I think the part that I want to say is I won't read anymore, but maybe just to say that. So she joined the Socialist Youth League and went to build railway lines in Czechoslovakia right after the war, where they were, just like picking up bricks and, like really hard work. And then she went on to England and went to study at the London School of Economics. And and later started to do work with Tanzania and supporting Tanzania, who had a socialist government, in building infrastructure with Nyerere, one of the few ethical governments in that early movement of African countries becoming independent from England, from Britain. The most significant thing for me was that, and this is where I think was really I feel like I've got my courage from, is that my parents were arrested along with a lot of other people in the Emergency Act of 1960 without trial. And they went on a hunger strike. There was a lot of activism to get them out of jail. And the hunger strike was a big reason. And it was just so interesting because my mom actually, through that hunger strike, lost her breasts. It's like her body ate all the fat of her breasts and they never came back again. It's just what happens when you don't eat for a long period of time. That's just something that, as a kid, was sort of very striking when my mom came back from jail. But what my parents decided is that the police force and the state was so empowered that they felt they needed to challenge it by doing sabotage. And so they went underground and organized with it was a multiracial underground organization to bomb different places to try to show confidence, to try and communicate confidence that the state could be challenged. And it just really reminds me, because I'm reading the history of the Black Panther Party, how in the very beginning of how the Black Panthers organized, it was actually, when it was legal to carry guns, they carried guns legally, and by carrying guns, actually never drew them, but confronted the police in public places when the police were, hauling people down on the sidewalks or, pushing them around, would confront them, holding their guns, strategically trying to communicate, we are empowered. We can fight a police state. So that's what my parents, I think it was like that, we could say misunderstanding, but who knows, that understanding. They bombed the record station of the police that had all the records of activists. Mm-hmm. They bombed some telephone pylons. They bombed the electrical unit and different things like that. They never hurt anyone. But anyway, they got a tip-off they were going to be arrested again, and so we left the country without our passports. And after that, my mom did a lot of training around how to support women to be empowered in organizations, because even though they were radical organization, as you can guess, women weren't always that empowered to take leadership. And she ended up doing all this work through Europe, supporting women to move into more empowered positions, especially in government, in Belgium and France and Europe. So I don't believe in violence personally, but I do feel like, as a Dharma teacher who talks a lot about oppression and colonization and the need to end systems of profit and capitalism, in places where actually no other teachers say anything, that courage of being willing to share my own perspective when it isn't always integrated into the Dharma comes from my mother, and their courage in taking a stand against oppression. And so I wanted to honor her tonight, and her courage and willingness to put her life on the line for freedom for all people in South Africa, and then to support women. And I would talk to her on the phone and Skype when she went back to South Africa, and I would say something that we were doing here at Lotus Sisters or somewhere else, and she'd say, "Oh yeah, I did that training, or I did that work in London 20 years ago." So the different people who have moved us in our life. There's a quote in the Dhammapada that I've been using a lot recently. It's just been coming back as a you know how sometimes the words of teachings comes back and is alive for a while. And it's that quote the Buddha says in the Dhammapada, which is the early teachings of the Buddha, that one moment of mindfulness is worth more than 100 years without it. Living 100 years without it. And the same, it feels like the same could be true for love, because they just go hand in hand. They're the two wings of the Dharma. And the power of those moments of courage, of presence, of open-heartedness that sustained people in that kind of liberation struggle where the state was so deeply directed in suppression, which is happening now. But for some of us, we've already experienced it, you know, and for as communities of color, as white people in civil rights movements who experience the increased repression, as trans, you know, the different parts of our community already who have experienced that extreme targeting. And bowing down through those experiences in this country, the Rohingya in Myanmar, and so many more places where there has been extreme repression, how in those places, in those very places, comes this incredible courage and resilience and love. Especially the love that comes from communities in resistance. And someone asked me about my family and how many sisters, and I have 3 blood sisters. And in all these struggles, because people were in jail and out of jail, there were all these people who lived with us who were also considered family. You know, how the sort of nuclear family breaks down, and just that love of my parents taking in people, and then when they were in jail, how 2 people took care of me and my sisters. That incredible resilience and love that breaks open in those places. And so really I want to end by talking about the central part of the Buddha's teaching, which is where there is suffering, that becomes the condition for liberation and nowhere else. You know, and that upandita, and I said this I know before that Upandita, in one of the retreats I did with him, a Burmese master, spent 3 days talking about 3 hours or more, because it was like 6 hours, because Islam talks for 2 hours, about how beautiful the heavenly realms were, and if through jhana states you get to the heavenly realms, and how peaceful they were, and this and that. I mean, all the details of it. And then right at the end said, there is no realm that you can liberate yourself from apart from the realm of suffering. That you cannot escape into peaceful realms because you're going to have to come back again. That there is no escape from conditioned reality except to turn directly towards places of suffering and to meet them. And in that meeting, whether it's in a retreat or whether it's as a community, in that acknowledgement of this is how it is, in that the Dharma grows, the heart grows, love and wisdom grow. Because it is in the perceiving of it, in that acknowledgement of it, and the ways we gather then to resist it, that the beautiful qualities flower. So then I will end with this poem. Wage peace with your breath. Breathe in firemen and rubble. Breathe out tall buildings and flocks of red-winged blackbirds. Breathe in terrorists and breathe out sleeping children and fresh-mown fields. Breathe in confusion and breathe out maple trees. Breathe in the fallen and breathe out lifelong friendships intact. Wage peace with your listening, hearing sirens, pray loud. Remember your tools, flower seeds, clothes, pins, and clean rivers. Make soup. Play music, learn the word for thank you in 3 languages. Learn to knit and make a hat. Think of chaos as dancing raspberries, open to grief, as the out-breath of beauty or the gesture of fish. Swim for the other side. Wage peace. Never has the world seemed so fresh and precious. Have a cup of tea and rejoice. Act as if armistice has already arrived. Don't wait another minute. Celebrate today. So thank you for that. And what I'd like to invite you to do just for 5 minutes is find a partner and share one moment of love. One moment of love that has touched you in your life. Just an experience. Either someone else's expression and communication of love towards you, or your own experience of love. A moment that really dropped and touched you.